Okay, so another video, I would call this video an under the hood video. And what I mean by that is I think it's really insightful and fun for people to get a view, an under the hood view of spiritual direction. And I had a point I wanted to make about spiritual experience and mystical experience. So, and then some like sort of dangers that come with mystical experience and how to navigate them. And I want to put it in a framework that anyone can relate to and understand. So, from the perspective of mystics, but also from the perspective of non-mystics who don't really have any kind of mystical experiences, but who are growing just the same as anyone else towards love. So let's start with the mystical experience aspect. So I'm going to share three people's experiences who they all come to the center. I think there's a 10-year difference between when they happened, but I'll just share them all and then kind of get to the point I'm trying to make about them. So the first mystical experience that I want to share is, and this all has to do, by the way, with people getting in a hurry. There's a Russian Orthodox Church sort of maxim for spiritual experience that says, strive to hear God's presence all the time. Strive to be listening for God's presence all the time. And we put a very heavy amount of emphasis on that here at the center because it turns out that you can, when you invite God to dwell inside of you, we know God is always with you. Well, everyone knows God is always with you. But there's also this other, more active presence of God that comes by invitation. And so if a person was to pay attention closely to how they experience, what their lived experience is before praying for God to dwell with them, what's it feel like in their legs and their body? Just what does it feel like to be you? And then when you ask God to dwell with you, and you give God permission to dwell with you, if you pay attention, you will notice very usually extremely subtle changes. And strictly speaking, at least according to Catholicism, and I tend to agree with this, you're not so you will experience a change in sensation as God's presence is more active in your soul, in your body, in your mind, in your heart. And strictly speaking, what you feel isn't God's presence. The scholastics say, strictly speaking, it's actually the effect God's presence is having on you. And that's an important distinction for many reasons, especially when it comes to how to navigate mystical experience. How can you tell if a mystical experience is false or real? And there's different sort of approaches on that. We're at the center, we're extremely conservative in how we go about mystical experience. Thomas Keating is a very well-known, sort of famous teacher of contemplative prayer, and his I was shocked when I read his sort of he talked about visions and mystical encounters that people have, because if you spend a lot of time in prayer, some percentage of the population is going to have visions. And he said about 80% of them will be true and about 20% would be false. And I remember being shocked at how generous that is. I do think it's about right. I don't think it's wrong. But I was sort of brought up with John of the Cross, it's a much more careful approach to navigating mystical experience, which basically he teaches you to generally just reject all of them outright. And and here's what he said. He said, because if a mystical experience comes from God, it doesn't need you to think about it or dwell on it in order for it to have its effect in your soul. Because that experience came from God, it is active in your soul, and it doesn't need a lot of thought or dwelling upon it in order for it to be active in your soul. And then he said, But if it came from your own mind or the devil, it only can have power over you if you dwell on it and think about it and recall it all the time. Try to catch that distinction, and if you missed it, you go back in the video and listen to that again. It's a very important distinction, especially I think for mystical types of people, because they're going to have false mystical experiences the way it is. And the other thing John of the Cross said is that even exceedingly holy souls cannot tell if an experience came from God or the devil or the self. And so there's just not quite any way to know for sure. So I thought when Keating said 80% would be correct, I mean, I didn't talk to him about that particular issue, but when he said that, I think I read it in one of his books. That I just thought, wow, that's very generous compared to the way I've been taught, because even the Trappist monk who was my spiritual director, we just took all that stuff with a grain of salt. We just didn't care about it very much, or give it any real attention. So I wanted that to be the backdrop of this video, because I'm going to be sharing about 3 people, 2 of whom had a mystical experience, and one who had something very interesting, a non-mystical mystical experience. And how I've just been puzzled by that and intrigued by that and blown away by it. And it's brought me so much wonder and joy. And I happen to have just met with that person for a follow-up spiritual direction session 2 weeks after she shared that encounter with me. And so I wanted to give you guys sort of an under the hood look at mystical experience and the effects it has on people, some of which are not quite what you would expect. So I thought it would be very interesting. The first encounter that I want to share with you is, I can't say anyone's name. I have to be very careful because I don't edit videos. If I say someone's name, I have to start the whole video over and delete everything I've said. So I'll try to be very careful not to mention anyone's name. But the first experience, probably 10 or 12 years ago. And it's from a man who started to come to the center and who had decided to make a very serious commitment to the path of spirituality. And what we do at the center, it's just Christianity, but it's a really deep commitment to Christianity. And so the notion of someone coming to the center and then deciding to stay, they could take as long as they want to decide if they're going to stay. But if a person decides that they're going to stay here, then that means that they're going to give up all other pursuits in life. And I don't mean quit their job or never go camping again or never go to the gym again. I don't quite mean that. But they're going to give up everything. They're going to offer everything to God and say, I will give you my whole life. I want to give you my whole life. I give you everything, my mind, my body, my heart, all my actions, my job, my career. I give you everything. What is your will for me? And that is the beginning commitment that people make when they start coming to the center. And some people come for a while before they decide if that kind of a commitment is right for them or is a fit for them. It may not be. But if it is, then they stay and they make that commitment. And then they begin to spend, a minimum of 20 minutes twice a day in prayer. Then that moves up to a half an hour twice a day. And within some period of time, it moves up to more like 45 minutes to an hour twice a day. Because most people, well, it's just a truth that 20 minutes is, I think 20 minutes twice a day is a trick that we use to get people to taste that there is something there. And once someone says, yeah, I mean, this is real. I've been spending this 20 minutes twice a day in prayer with God, and I'm experiencing something, either changes in their life that were not coming before, changes in their personality, a deepening of their spirituality that is unconnected to any other activity except that they're now praying, or they start to experience states of consciousness in prayer and meditation that are striking or significant enough or marked enough for them to say, oh, this is real, this is happening. Then that, once they're hooked, that's the hook, you know. They see either results happening that they never saw before, or they're hitting states of some kind of experience with God that they didn't have before. And that's the hook. Then we think, then I think they're hooked. I think now they're hooked on God. They see it is real. They know that it's real. They've experienced God's presence and they know it's real. So then we would begin inviting those people to start spending another 20. Like, hey, why stop at 20? Have you noticed how you're getting into a pretty good place? In fact, I just had a conversation last week with somebody who is new to the center. And they're doing the 20 minutes twice a day. They still miss every once in a while, and that's a really bad sign. But it's correctable. But it just can't become a permanent habit. They've got to get to a place where if they woke up late for work, they would rather be 20 minutes later and spend that time in meditation and prayer than rush off and go to work without it. It's got to become first. It's got to become the first thing in their life. And so this person is working on that, getting where they never ever miss. But they're also noticing, and I pointed it out. I said, if you're just quitting at 20 minutes, I said, my guess is you're just barely getting anywhere important when you quit, when you stop. And he said, yeah, that is true. He said, I'm just starting to get out of my head completely. I'm just starting to get to a place. I don't remember exactly what he said, but he's just starting to get to a place where it's just him and God in there. And he's not up there with his head spinning and thinking about the world. So then that's exactly when you say, hey, I would bump that up to 30 or 40 minutes because you're just getting where you've put the world aside and you could spend one time with God and then you're getting up and going back to the world. So why don't you hang out another 20 minutes? And if it's a day off and you don't have anywhere to be, why don't you hang out until you naturally come out? It might be 45 minutes, it might be an hour. And then you'll just kind of emerge naturally without making a decision to. And you'll get so much more out of that session of prayer with God because you'll spend so much more time one on one with God. And so that's the stage he's at, where he's now, for sure, he'll just start to bump up the time he's spending because you think about this. If it's taking him about 20 minutes to get where he's at least as much with God as he is his brain and his thinking. Let's just say it's about there. It could be more with God than he is thinking, or a little less with God than thinking, but he's 20 minutes into prayer and he's experiencing God in some way. 20 more minutes will be that much deeper into the prayer. And my guess with him is that he will sometimes start going into what Teresa of Avila called spiritual sleep or absorption, which is talked about in the fourth and fifth mansions in her book. I forgot the name of the book just now. It's Teresa of Avila's Mansions, the Interior Castle. So in there, she describes the stages of prayer. And she describes in the fourth stage, if I have this memory correct, fourth stage, spiritual sleep, fifth stage, absorption. And I suspect that this guy is going to start going into spiritual sleep, at least, maybe, once in a great while, absorption. But he's not going to go there in the first 20 minutes. He's going to go there if he sticks it out after that first 20 minutes and allows himself to be pulled deeper into God's presence. So the point I wanted to make with that is that first 20 minutes is just getting him somewhere. If he adds another 20, he's going to spend that whole 20 minutes there or deeper. And that's going to be more than twice as effective in how it transforms his life. It it will easily double his spirituality and his connection with God. So it's significant. So okay, so anyway, so this story that I'm going to share with you is from a guy that had made the decision to, hey, I'm going to give my whole life to God here. I really want my life to be about God. I don't want to be it to be about self anymore. And he got on this path. And his path is long and storied, like mine. Um, there's all kinds of wrong turns and things. But at this point, and then now actually, he's very devoted. So he's at a very devoted place. And he's reading the saints and he's talking to people at the center. And we're talking about how the whole journey seems to really come down to if you're really willing to give your whole life to God or not. And your will, basically. Are you willing to give your entire will to God and never take it back? And Teresa of Avila said something like that, to the effect that she entered the highest stages of prayer and didn't leave anymore. Just as soon as she gave her entire will over to God and never took it back. So there's a healing, there's a transformation that takes place in the will that Jesus produces in the will. Over time, Jesus heals your will that's disordered and wants everything but God, until over time it wants God more and more, and at some point only God. Then your eye is single. Then your eye is single. And you're on a different journey. So this guy had taken that step towards that place. He had not entered that place, but he had taken the step to go that way, and he meant it. And he meant it as much as he knew that it was possible for him to mean it, which is very far away from where he'll one day be. But he was new and he didn't know that. So he's reading the saints saying it's just about giving your entire will to God, and when you give your entire will to God, it all comes. And he's saying, well, then why isn't it coming? And he expressed an impatience with God, very common with new people who are confused about where the problem lies. And he expressed a frustration with God. He's like, I remember him telling me this, I am willing right now to go all the way to God. Why won't God come get me? And so now all of a sudden, see, the problem isn't him, the problem is God. And that's a problem. That's the problem of the Garden of Eden. That's the problem of, hey, Eve, what happened? Oh, the devil did it. Hey, Adam, what happened? Oh, Eve made me do it. See, it's this deflection of sin towards the other that is the problem. So he expressed this, which is pride. And also, I would just say ignorance, because new people just don't know better usually, but it's still totally prideful. And he happened to be sleeping outdoors one night in his backyard. And I wouldn't say that this guy is a mystical person. It's difficult to say, even though he's been on the path many years, because when people start to hit stage 5, prayer, I'm not saying necessarily they're at stage 5 their whole life or all the time, but when people start to hit the stages of that Teresa of Avila talks about at stage 5, many people who weren't having mystical experiences begin to. So I'm not sure if he's a mystic or not, but as far as my relationship with him, it has been that he is not that much of a mystic. There's really just a spectrum of, way lights on and way lights off people. And I would say he's on that side of he's growing spiritually just like everybody else, but he's not aware of all these experiences. He's not having a ton of experiences. But this is what happened to him right up front. This is pretty close to the beginning of his journey. He's sleeping outside and he's making this prayer. Hey, God, I'm ready. Why won't you take me? I want to go right now. I will go. If you will take me into union, I will go. Some people do wake up like that. It wasn't wrong for him to try. It wasn't. It's not wrong to try to give your whole life to God. but the problem was in him and he didn't know it. So he had this really profound, very unusual. I've rarely heard anything. I've only ever heard one other person have something like it. Uh, this is what happened to him in his backyard. I think he fell asleep, but I'm not sure. I don't want to put words in his mouth. But he woke up, or all of a sudden just noticed that right next to where he was laying was all of a sudden his grass was gone, and instead, in place of the earth and the grass, was a giant black hole going down. And he understood that if he were to lean over that, to roll over or step over or whatever, to go over the edge of that, if he were to do that, he would go straight to God. And he was filled with terror and couldn't do it. And the hole closed. So then, as is the case with many people who have, this is a very unusual experience, but I've heard others like it, many others like it, but not so visual and just astounding sounding. This just sounds astounding. The hole came back. Well, no. The hole went away. Then he instantly regretted that he was unable to say yes. So he said, "Oh God, please give me another chance, give me another chance." And the hole came back. And once again, he could not. He could not get himself to go over the edge into God. And then so it closed. And then he regretted again deeply that he was unable to say yes. And he said, "Please, please give me another chance." And it opened again. And a third time, kind of like Peter denying Christ 3 times before the cock crowed, a third time the hole opened. I gave him another chance. He said, "I can't do it." And it closed again. And he shared that experience with me. That was kind of neat. And we talked about it. And it's in a family of mystical experiences that people sometimes have that lets them know the problem is them and not God. And why he had a particularly intense experience is anyone's guess. God knows what God is doing. We don't know. But I could say that the way this man had been brought up, the religion he had been brought up in, there was maybe a sense of being abandoned by God on purpose, like God just didn't like him. And so I think maybe he needed to experience this very profound thing with God to settle any issue for him about who it was that was keeping God at bay. He might have gone without such a profound experience. He might have gone a long time. I don't know this. This is just conjecture. He might have gone a long time, or his whole life maybe, thinking God had abandoned him instead of him abandoning God, unless he had had that experience, or maybe he wouldn't have chosen to take a deep journey if he didn't have that experience, but for whatever reason he had it. And that settled for him where the problem lies. Why am I not able to love everyone now? Not because God won't send the power of love, because God is always sending the power of love, right? I mean, when is God not sending it? You know, when Jesus was transfigured, it's the disciples experienced Jesus as being transfigured before their eyes. His clothes become whiter than the whitest snow, and he's glowing with this light. That, strictly speaking, didn't happen to Jesus. That happened to the disciples. It's not unheard of. The Orthodox Church, this is just a known thing. That like the Orthodox Church, there'll be a spiritual director, then there'll be their person they're helping, their student, I guess. And the spiritual director may well be profoundly enlightened, already transfigured. And the student has no idea, they can't see it. And then when the student gets advanced enough, holy enough, spiritual enough, purified enough, however, or ready or whatever, or God just chooses to do it for whatever reason, then all of a sudden, well, this is the experience that was shared with me. This spiritual director is talking to his person, and his person won't look at him. So the spiritual director says, "You're not looking at me. Why?" He said, "I would look, except for the brightness of the light shining off you is so bright I can't look." Then the teacher says, "This didn't happen to me today. This happened to you today. You saw it. You were raised to a place where you can see it." So, and that's kind of how it works. So for whatever reason, this man had that encounter, and his encounter, his usefulness to this video ends at that point. But I want to share two more that are similar, but that are more directly related to the point I want to make at the end of the video. So one more now, another one. It's a person who's extremely, I would say, extremely devoted to God. He's definitely the mystical type. So he has lots of mystical experiences. It's normal for him to have a lot of those. And he, how do I say it? It doesn't matter where he is. He's done a good amount of work. You would definitely not call this person a beginner. You could be a beginner and be on the path for 20 years. So it's not that he's done it a long time, so that automatically makes him not a beginner. But he's just, I wouldn't say he's a beginner. I would say he's, come a ways. He's come a ways on the path. And he's suffered to get there. He's been through deserts and purification, intense. And needed, because we all need it so much, but similar type experience, totally different format, totally different form, but similar type. He's told, he hears a voice in prayer. He's down in deep prayer and hears a voice. And it says, "We have you on a slow IV drip of joy." That's what it says. "We have you on a slow IV drip." Like IV, like you've got a line at the hospital into your veins. We've got you on a slow IV drip of joy. And either before or after that, I can't remember which, he had a profound experience with the joy that the Gospels are talking about. They're not, I mean, they are talking about the joy you would experience if, you won the lottery, or if something really neat or good, even just good happened, like truly good happened in your life, better than a lottery, something truly good happened in your life. That is the joy they're talking about, but it's also very, very watered down version of it. There's this other joy that is like blinding white light. And there's a joy that's powerful enough that it could frighten you. At a certain point, it would frighten you the same way water doesn't bother you at all if you turn on a drinking fountain. But if it got stronger and stronger and you couldn't pull your face away, and it got so strong now it's a fire hose, you're terrified. God's power is like that. So that's why that guy couldn't jump in the hole, because he had an awareness of God's infinity, magnitude, holiness, all of it, and couldn't go. Well, anyway, so this guy had an experience with joy. I don't remember how he described it. He just told me that it was absolutely incredible. And it got him high as a kite. I mean, he was really, really buzzed. Extremely. And he said he knew that he had just experienced a sliver of, or a fraction of, the real fullness of God's joy. And that it was all that he could take. And I don't want to put words in his mouth, so I'm just going to say what other people have said, or what I've said, or whatever. Maybe it would harm him if it got stronger, is how it feels. It feels like it could kill you. It's so powerful. I think that's why people fall on their faces when they're visited by angels, unless the angel hides its glory from you. You're going to be in terror of it, because it is so much power. And it doesn't matter that it's love. It doesn't matter that it's joy. It is so strong. And it feels like, because you're full of sin, it can't shine through you. It's getting stopped on places. It feels like it's going to burn you up. So anyway, either before or after the slow ivy drip of joy voice he heard, he had this encounter with intense joy, and two things happened. One is he was somewhere with his family experiencing so much joy. And I think he may not have, but I think he, without meaning to, was he was experiencing supernatural joy for sure. And he got really high, and he had so much fun with his kids that he burned himself out. And I think he got attached to that joy without noticing it, and lost his ground and lost his root in humility, in poverty of spirit. It's like God's power comes on you, and then your body responds, and it also produces chemicals. It's why scientists that are atheists think that mystical experience is just a phenomenon of the brain, because they'll hook someone up to brain monitoring equipment, and then they'll, it might be a nun. I read one study was Catholic nuns that could go into a very high state of prayer basically at will, and they're hooked up to these brain monitoring equipment, and so they'll go into this unitive state with God, and then their brain activity radically changes. I mean, it's marked, and it's often changed in a way that they don't measure among any other group of people unless they're deeply religious. So what I'm trying to say is there's what God does, but then there's the way our divine meat, right? God made our bodies in the image of God. Like we are not an afterthought. We are designed with capacities for God. There's also a way in which our body reacts to those energies from God, those uncreated energies from God. And we produce chemicals that make us feel joy and bliss, and it's all part of it. It's physical and spiritual. It's not one or the other. But atheist scientists will look at that and say, see, it's just physical. We see it in the brain. They're not really experiencing God. Their brains just, their technique they're using is change their brain chemistry and activity, and now they're having an encounter. But that's just, dualism. That's just dualism. That's a black and white kind of thinking. The truth is, it's God's activity that caused that change in the brain, but the brain is certainly a part of the experience. So what happened to this guy is he's having that, right? Like if he was hooked up to a brain monitoring thing, it would look like those nuns for sure. He's pretty, at this moment with his kids, I think they're at an aquarium or something, and he's just, getting nailed by God's power, man. And he's experiencing it really strong and so much joy, but something went wrong. I don't know if he got attached to it, or if he just didn't know better. It doesn't matter. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but something happened, and he used up all of his chemicals. So now he crashed, and he crashed really hard and really fast right there at the aquarium. And I don't know if it's true, but I think he had to go lay in the car, just take a break. And I was like, whoa, all of a sudden I'm very tired. I need to go take a break. Okay. So I'll go more into how to navigate. What does that mean? But I want to share this other person's experience first. So this person is firmly on the non-mystical side of the spectrum. Personally, I just think it's all a spectrum. I don't think there's really anyone who's not mystical at all. And then there's, very few people. I mean, and then way on the other side, there's people that are almost always mystical. They're just, it's, Teresa of Avila kind of people, just way out there. And they're all just part of humanity. It's just humanity. I see it as just personality types, really. Soul types, it's just a spectrum of people. But she's way over here on the side of boots on the ground. She's a doer. She is a contemplative, but that's by, just because she shows up for it. She's a doer. She's an active kind of person that does things. And her husband's really mystical, so that's a nice balance. But they're both spiritual. They're both growing in the same ways, but she doesn't have mystical experience is the point. And what happened to her a couple of weeks ago was so neat. She doesn't remember how it happened. She doesn't know if she had a dream but something. She just was all of a sudden different. And I know what that is. God has touched her. If she was a mystic, she would have got high as a kite, experienced a big change in her consciousness, felt all these energies flowing through her, whatever, the Holy Spirit, tongues of fire, whatever. But she's not a mystic. So she just didn't notice that part of it. And that's the part John of the Cross says kind of doesn't matter. The part she didn't notice. It's not really the point. Maybe a mystic would have had a vision to get what she got. Maybe they would have saw a white light to get what she got. But the point is, what she got is the same thing a mystic would have gotten if they were struck by a blinding white light for a minute. Okay, so it's all under the hood. I just think this is so neat. Under the hood is, here's the path, but let's look at the engine. Let's look at the details. So this is under the hood. Okay, not a mystic at all. Been on the path a number of years. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, she has this desire to be able to be completely lost in service for the rest of her life. And it's the same desire a mystic would have after they tasted God's power or love or joy or whatever. It's the same. So the result is the same, very intense. I recognized it immediately. She happened to have come in for a session of spiritual direction. So she came in and she's telling me this is where she's at, and she's talking, and I know this person is not a mystical type, but this desire that she has, this burning kind of not normal desire to give herself so fully to God that she could serve forever and never think of herself and not get tired, just be filled with the ability to love. She just wanted to love so fully that she just really just never, she lamented her weakness. She lamented her, whatever's in the way of that. And but she didn't remember the experience. See, a mystic would have had an experience that sparked that reaction. She just has the reaction. And this, to me, seems to be about what it's like for non-mystics and mystics to grow in. Mystics will experience it all. 80% of it will be somewhat accurate. 20% fuzzy, real fuzzy, or nefarious. They've got to learn to navigate what's what over time. And if they make it to the top, they don't get tricked by false mysticism. That's kind of the path for the mystic. The non-mystic, it's less troublesome, really, I think, because they don't have as much of that happening, but it doesn't change that their soul is being changed the same. So I'm sitting with this woman, and, we're as far away on the spectrum as you can almost get. And I love her deeply. I think she loves me. We have a great spiritual relationship together. But all of a sudden, I feel like I'm talking to a mystic. It's like, oh, we connect way more. I understand you way more now. But she has no conscious experience of that. She just all of a sudden had an understanding of what it would mean to love fully. The joy and okay, so here's the point. So now it's really strong. And it's just like when the disciples saw Jesus for the glowing being that he already was. And they're like, man, let's make tents here. We'll get Moses and Elijah and let's hang out. Let's stay here. It's good for us to be here, Jesus. Let's stay here. And he's like, hey, man, we got to go down. We got work to do. Well, that's just like new people. So, they get in this place of love. They're like, oh, yeah, let's stay forever. And I mean, that is ultimately the goal, but maybe you don't realize how long of a journey it is to get where you could really love like that all the time. And so they're like, let's make tents and let's stay. And you don't get to stay. You got to go down, and you're going to go down and die. You're going to go down and give your life for this. It's going to be some hardship in this. And so what happened to her, and I think the other guy that had the ivy drip of joy, similar, but a little different, but similar, and not so much the first guy, um, is she got overzealous and made the mistake of saying, hey, why does it have to take so long? And that's a good question. You're not in sin by saying, why does it have to take so long? But there was a bit of an edge there, like, why is God taking so long? Or that might be putting words in this person's mouth. I keep saying that because they're going to watch these, and I just want to make sure it's accurate. Maybe it didn't go there. Maybe it was more like just pride of self, like, I'm just going to do that right now. But they got attached to the here's the thing. If our point is to love only God first, and our neighbor as ourselves is the second commandment. The first commandment is we only love God. So where is she sinning against the commandments when she gets overzealous about this being able to love thing? Well, in a very subtle way, she's putting the results of having a profound relationship with God before God. That's how. So God touches her in a very mysterious, invisible way. And now she burns with this desire to love. But now it's almost like she's going to go love. So now, where's God? She's grabbed it by the reins. She's taken control. She's taken something that was a free gift and now tried to turn it into works. And that's, works are good, but they have to flow naturally. They can't be forced. There's ego involved in force. So I wonder, now it's 2 weeks later today, she's coming in for her second spiritual direction period after having that encounter that she didn't see or experience, but it just happened mysteriously. And I'm very curious, like, where is she, right? Is she still riding on this high? Where is she? I don't know where she'll be. I'm not sure. I've got ideas, but you don't know, so you just wait. But I'm curious about this one. Very curious. Well, she comes in kind of wrecked, kind of like the second guy got wrecked. And she said the last 2 weeks have been nothing but problems arising, and her problems. The purification, the self-examination, the things you need to see and let go of in order to love fully. Okay, so I said, yeah, that now I relate to you even more, because this is the thing. She had a mystical experience. I'm going to just call it that from now on, even though she only experienced the result of it, which is still profoundly mystical and the only part of the mystical that really matters. So she had a profound mystical experience, but she got ahead of herself. She got out over her shoes, out over her skis. She's leading with her chin. She's leaning forward, and she's trying to hurry and get there. And now she's annoyed that she's not already there, either annoyed with God or annoyed with herself. It doesn't matter. They're both big problems. And she's turned it into an ego project. And so, she wiped out, because that always happens after a powerful experience like that. There's ways to mitigate it, but she made the mistake that makes the wipeout even bigger, which is to try to rush it, to try to force it, to try to push it. And that's that Russian maxim. Strive to always be listening to God's presence and never try to make it more or less powerful than it is. And never try to make it different than it is. And if you're on a spiritual journey, you'll know what I mean. That's easier said than done. That's a thing you got to get really good at navigating, because everything else is self-will. It's like Jesus, the disciples experienced Jesus glowing. He's already been glowing, but they notice. So they're high now. Now they're in a very high state of consciousness. They want to stay. But then, see, if they try to stay there, they're now sinning. Because as soon as God says it's time to go back down, they're sinning when they try to stay. That's self will. Might as well be smoking pot. It's the same thing. It's self will. So, see, so it's like, it's so strive to always listen to God and never try to make it more or less powerful than it is. And never try to make it different than it is. So the mistake she made is she wasn't humble enough in that moment to not grab the reins and try to get there quicker, stronger, faster. It's like Jesus saying, I'm going to wash your feet, Peter. Peter says, you'll never wash my feet. And then Jesus says, if I don't wash your feet, you'll have no part in me. Then Peter says, then wash my whole body. And it's like Peter, just stop pulling away and stop leaning in. Just hold still and let Jesus do what he's doing. And that's what this woman, so we just had a conversation that really made me want to, I wasn't going to do a video today at all. I wasn't going to do a video for 4 days. But this conversation with her just, I couldn't not do it. So she leaned too far forward. So she went further than the Holy Spirit was taking her, right? She pushed against God instead of with God. God showed her something wonderful. She tried to finish it with works, like Paul said. Are you so foolish as to end with the flesh what was begun by the Spirit? She's trying to end with the flesh something begun by the Spirit. It's out of whack. It's sin. It's, good sin. I mean, I guess it's definitely better than smoking pot. But it's sin, is the point I'm trying to make. So she leaned forward. She leaned into it too much. She tried to force it. She used up the chemicals in her brain and wherever else they're produced. I'm not really deeply knowledgeable in all of that, but she used it up. I know what it feels like to burn out of them. And she burned out and she crashed for a couple of weeks. Not terribly. She's a school teacher. She's a mom. She's doing work. She didn't just lay in bed. But it brought up a lot of disorder. Now, a good percentage of that disorder would not have happened if she had caught herself leaning forward and said, whoa, let me be humble. I don't need to rush this. It's not God's fault. And I have to be humble enough to accept my limitations, that maybe I'm a little slow coming in this way and I need to be okay with that. If she had caught that, she would have had less burnout, but she wouldn't have had none. And that's the other thing I wanted to point out is if you are if you get nailed by God in a particularly strong way, either in a group of people together or in a period of prayer or just driving down the road, and for some reason God does that, if you get nailed with God in a particularly strong way, it's the whole point is to, here's the technique I use. Here's what I use. It's from John of the Cross, but here's the technique I use. I say, okay, I'm aware of God's presence being very strong. And I make sure that my will detaches from the experience of God's presence, the effect that it's producing in me. It might be blissful or joyful or humbling or whatever. It doesn't matter what it is. I detach from that. I don't try to make it go away, but I just detach and say, I only choose God. I do not choose this experience. And John of the Cross he draws this map. It's like a line. It goes a line and it goes up and then back down. And on the way up, he uses all these words of, different God's glory, which is God's power, and all these different things. What is God's experience with God? And to the higher and higher ones that happen at the very peak of union with God. And then up the center of this hump that he along the outside lines, he describes what the experiences are, okay? They get increasingly more intense. But right up the center, he says, nada. He's a Spanish mystic. Nada, 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 nada. And even on the mountaintop, nada. Nada means nothing. And so he's teaching you how to navigate intense spirituality, whether you're a mystic, whether you're like this woman that just gets the change in her soul and gets attached to it. The second she got attached to that, the result of what God did to her, it was idolatry. It was no longer nada, right up the center. Only God is nada is the same as saying only God, not the effects God produces. Only God, not the effects God produces in me. Only God, not the effects. And I hope this is becoming clear. So her burnout was far greater than it needed to be because she got attached to the experience instead of to the source of the experience. She violated the first commandment to love God with all your heart, mind, strength, soul, being. All of it on God alone. And all these results happen, but the trick is to keep your attention on God alone and not on the results. The results do happen. If you're a mystic, you're gonna feel all this stuff. That's fine. Not the point, though. Not the point. And this is why people crash so hard after having mystical experience, because they lose their presence in the midst of this encounter, or in the midst of this 6 really amazing days filled with love and joy, right? Which are non-mystics have all the time. Like, those get super happy. They're just like really happy about life and everything's so great. And at some point, because of our sinful nature, that happiness or the joy or the love or the peace becomes the focus. God is now in second place. The first commandment is now in second place. And now the whole enterprise must crumble because the lamp has unplugged itself from the wall. The soul has unplugged itself from God. It's a weakness, it's a sin, but it's also an ignorance. So you don't know better till you're taught better. And it takes some practice, I would say, because the stronger that gets, if you're really good, like say some saint, I don't know, some great saint, Teresa of Avila, when she was getting 50% of whatever God's power they ended up sending through her in the end, like the total amount, 100%. When she was 50% there, she had enough humility at some point to have that go into her and not make that power that's in her an idol. Whether it's joy or visions or whatever, she levitated and did all kinds of amazing stuff. But it's true that when she could only handle 50%, that if it went stronger than that, she'd kind of lose it and have to go through purification, right? So that's the point. They run more, and then you adjust, and then they put more through you, and then you adjust, and that's how you bring towards higher and higher stages of consciousness. So that's the whole point that I'm trying to make is you strive to always hear God's presence, always be listening. I don't care if I feel it or not at all. I just don't even care. It doesn't make me slightly nervous if I don't feel it. If I don't feel it for a month, I just don't care. It is irrelevant because I know God, and the feelings God produces in me are different. I know those are not the same thing. So when I was immature, if I didn't feel God's presence, even for a few hours, I would start getting really nervous that I had lost something important, that I had gone astray somehow. And of course, that is possible. So you kind of worry a little. You can't help it. But just the fact that I don't feel God's presence now is utterly, I don't even care, because my alignment to God is through faith, not through experience. So all of that, my experience is that my experience with my mystical experience seems to be growing now, But but the foundation of that growth is that it shouldn't matter at all. It's just God that we care about. We don't care about the effects God produces in us. They matter. I mean, gosh, the second commandment is love your neighbor, and you'd sure like to be a better husband. I know I'd like to be a better husband or a better father or a better friend, and I need to be. So it's like you want those effects. It matters, but not more than God. God is first. God is first. Okay, so that's under the hood. I hope that's useful. The main thing I wanted people to get is to be aware of that burnout that comes from even naturally, even if you don't do the messing the commandments up parts, reversing them, even if you don't do that, um, if you're going to experience some purification, usually on if you don't just grow in a super steady way. Some people just grow so steady they never notice these kinds of things very much. It's just slow and steady wins the race, man. Some people don't have peaks that happen to them for there to later be a big period of purification on the other side of it. Some people are just a little more steady. That's one personality type. It's one way in. But a lot of people have ups and downs with it. And if you just, next time you're up, whether it's just your joy or your love or you have a mystical experience, the next time you're up, see if you can catch it and say, okay, all right, I'm up. Don't try to make that go away. No one's saying it's bad. It's good. But just make a distinction with your will. Where is your will? Is my will focused on these good feelings that God has produced in me? Or is it actually focused on God? Have I subtly put God down because the feeling of joy is strong enough that I've forgotten to pay attention to God alone? This is where the sin happens. And it leads to bigger crashes. And it also has to be corrected at some point, because if that doesn't get corrected, you're capped at a certain level of mystical experience or spiritual experience, like the woman who just wanted to love so much. If she doesn't get that corrected, she's capped there and she won't go further. Now, it is God's grace that heals that, but she has to be willing for God to heal it. She has to practice self-examination, self-knowledge. She has to see the part of her that was impetuous and prideful and be willing to admit that honestly, give it to God openly, and say, I genuinely, sincerely repent and I want to be different. If she can do that, she'll continue to navigate to higher places. If she can't do that, she'll remain stuck where she is. Not because God won't take her deeper, but because she won't go deeper. Okay, I hope that's clear. Thanks, everyone. Did not even mean to shoot a video, but just after that session with that woman, I really, my heart was kind of pounding. I wanted to so much. So thanks, everyone, so much. Appreciate it.